he's a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson is a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. Yes, he's a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson is a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt.
There are some days, you know, when we scrabble around for stories with which to engage you and hope that you will have something to say, or at least something to think about whatever raw materials we put in front of you. And there are some days when you're spoiled for choice. And oddly, in many ways, I prefer the former. I prefer the days where it's hard to find stuff to talk about, because so much of what concerns us and compels you to contact me is stuff that either upsets or slightly enrages us. Enrage as in it activates your sense of injustice and your sense of a grievance at being abused or manipulated or taken for a mug. And today we're in the latter. Where do you even begin? You know, with the constant underlying consciousness of the Fifth Avenue factor, as I've elected to call it, Donald Trump quite brilliantly describing what happens when you achieve a sort of impunity by promising your followers that their bigotries and prejudices will not only be indulged but actively celebrated and promoted. In return, they will forgive you anything. As he said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. I don't know. I'm as prone to getting carried away as the next man is, and I am as vulnerable to the dangers of seeing what I want to see and hearing what I want to hear as anybody else is. But I do wonder. Nick Cohen, one of my favourite journalists, actually, he was tweeting, I hope in preparation for a column in The Observer on Sunday, he was tweeting earlier this week about what would they have to do now. So much of the scandal and the screw-up would have been career-ending, or at least job-ending. It would have been resignation issues in any normal era. They've barely been in power for 18 months. Is it 18 months yet? I think you'd get change, wouldn't you, out of 18 months? And they already seem to have presided over so much dishonesty and disgrace that none of it matters. It's actually baffling. And of course, then I've got the guilt trip. You can tell I'm a Catholic, can't you? I've got the guilt trip kicks in immediately, because I actually relish having so much material in a way to get my teeth into, even though as a punter, as opposed to a presenter, I prefer the days. There was a famous case on the telly news in about the 20s, maybe, I forget. It's probably apocryphal. Don't look it up. I'd rather carry on believing it was true. Where the newsreader said, "Today there is no news." Now, that would be very bad for business. You know, I couldn't do, however much Keith might desire it, 15 mystery hours every single week. I could maybe start spinning some platters, or bring back Beat the Sweet. There's one for the old school. But it would not be good for business. But when there's so much news, and it is almost all, portraying the current government, the Vote Leave government, in the most negative and disgraceful of terms, and yet one poll yesterday has them stretching their legs and pulling way ahead of the Labour Party. Keir Starmer back to more or less where he was when he started after a year. Well, you know the next bit of this sentence. You know how this song ends. After a year in which these people have presided over the highest death rate in the world of any country with a population over 20 million and one of the worst recessions on the planet, certainly the worst in the G7. It's actually unbelievable. And again, I say, I know it's not much comfort to you if you're a nurse and you've just been offered an absolute pittance by way of a pay rise. But, you know, this is the stuff that gets us out of bed in the morning. This is our bread and butter, you and me. Someone who presents a programme like this, and someone who hopefully enjoys listening to a programme like this. It's our bread and butter, and there is so much bread and butter today. It feels like a Warburton's factory has collided with a Lurpak lorry. However, so where do you begin? What do you do? Just pick the one that winds you up the most, the one that you think is most emblematic of the broader problem? I think this juxtaposition is incredible. Roland Manthorpe at Sky News reports that data from hundreds of millions of check-ins by people who visited pubs, restaurants and hairdressers before lockdown was barely used by Test and Trace, according to a confidential report that they have got hold of. The failure of the service to use the data for alerts or contact tracing meant that thousands of people were not warned they might be at risk of infection, potentially leading to the spread of the virus. And then you turn to Paul Waugh in the Huffington Post, who has had a little dig into the small print of the budget that everyone was so excited about earlier this week. And it would appear that the £22 billion we were already aware had been spent on this service that we have also learned today didn't really work, is going to rise to about £37 billion over 2 years. And nurses have been offered about £3.50 a week. So you know that Matt Hancock has already been found to... You see what I mean about not knowing where it ends? It's just like we're just sort of piling story upon story upon story. And I am acutely conscious, possibly more conscious than anybody else in this business, of how little it matters to so many. It's astonishing. And oddly fascinating, because they've spent, or they will have spent, £37 billion on a test and trace system that doesn't work. We know that the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, has been found to have acted unlawfully by not disclosing details of contracts that have been handed out, it is alleged, to unqualified companies, cronies and conservative donors in order to deliver on PPE and other issues. We know that £37 billion would have been spent in the private sector on test and trace. The reason vaccinations have gone so well, according to every healthcare worker I've spoken to, is that the rollout was left in the hands of the NHS, who knew what they were doing, and not given to a private sector company that didn't, with, of course, the side order of undiluted praise for Kate Bingham's work in procuring those vaccines. It can't just be that, can it? When I build this enormous mountain of evidence, or you see the scales, and you've got the death rate, you've got the economy, you've got the £37 billion on test and trace, you've got the unlawful conduct, you've got the fact that it didn't work, that none of the data was used. You've got Priti Patel yesterday being ordered to pay £340,000 to a former civil servant who claimed that he was unfairly dismissed, constructively dismissed from his job after bringing the bullying allegations into the light. It's £340,000 of taxpayers' money. That is, headline writers of the world unite, that is a pretty penny, is it not? So, I mean, where does it even begin, let alone end? And we haven't even, well, we've barely mentioned the nurses yet. So, I don't know, at some point you're going to have to let me have an hour asking what you think it would take for Boris Johnson to be dented. I mean, you've got a million theories on how he continues to get away with this. The entire government is, of course, built upon lies that are only now becoming clear with regard to Brexit. But even as the Irish sea border that he swore would never happen throws a massive spanner into the entire Irish peace process, as many of us explained is the best word I can use. Not insisted or argued, but simply explained was inevitable when the Good Friday Agreement ran headlong into the decision to depart from customs union and single market. All of this became inevitable. You know that because you were listening to this. Well, no, actually, you might have heard someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg completely deny the simple reality that is now emerging on this programme, and you might have gone away believing him, but you can't now. But you can't admit it yet, which is why Johnson is almost untouchable, because the minute you admit that he's responsible for almost unprecedented catastrophe in terms of death, in terms of economy, in terms of contract awards, in terms of unlawful conduct in the Department of Health, in terms of £340,000 worth of settlement coming out of the Home Office after the Home Secretary was found to have bullied staff, and the independent advisor on the Ministerial Code who arrived at that conclusion resigned after Boris Johnson elected to ignore it, after Dominic Cummings looked you in the eye and told you that he'd gone on a drive to a tourist spot on his wife's birthday in lieu of a visit to Specsavers, and you were ordered to believe him. And then Priti Patel and Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson and Nadeem Zahawi and Liz Truss and all the rest of them were ordered out in front of the cameras to defend Dominic Cummings. He did what any father would do, and then wonder why our death rate spiked again. I mean, where does it end? What would it take? But I don't think we're going to do that conversation today, because I think today we have a duty to draw attention to the nurses. And, you know, it's actually unbelievable to me, because even if you are fully conscious of all of the scandals and screw-ups that we've just touched upon. I'm sure there are more. You've probably got a favourite and you're screaming at your radio because I've missed it. Oh, the primary school's opening for a day. The A-levels and the GCSE debacle. I could stay here till 1 o'clock. They'll have to drag me out of the studio while Sheila Fogarty gets ready for action. We could sit here all day. And this profound fear that none of it matters is actually really scary. Look what happened in America. Look what happened when Nazis and fascists and Holocaust deniers sought to find the vice president, having followed the president's orders to head towards the Capitol, the president's insistence, and they sought to find the actual vice president. Look what happens when you have a leadership that has managed to unhitch itself from any consequences for its actions whatsoever. It's bizarre. And yeah, it's only one poll yesterday. But if Starmer can't make any of this stick, then frankly, he's about as much use as a chocolate teapot. And the jury's still out, as far as I'm concerned. But he's got to start making some of this stuff stick. Otherwise, he will no longer be entitled to call himself the leader of the opposition, because he won't really be providing any meaningful opposition at all. £37 billion on test and trace. £30 billion in the budget being withdrawn or removed or cut from the overall budgets for the Department of Health and Social Care. The plan that he stood on Downing Street steps and said was already good to go for social care, it was reported yesterday, doesn't exist. The checks that he swore blind would never happen are happening. The withdrawal agreement that he claimed would get Brexit done and offered up some sort of oven-ready deal is neither a withdrawal or, indeed, an agreement, because they're already threatening, not even threatening to break it, they're already stating that they will break it. But of course Ursula von der Leyen nearly did something similar one Friday afternoon in January and then very quickly changed her mind. So, no, I'm not going to do it, not today. What would it take? What on earth would it take for the scales to fall from your eyes is a phone-in I'm going to save for a rainy day. It would sound almost like comedy, wouldn't it, now, to throw open the phone lines and say, give me a ring if you want to defend nurses being offered 1%. A little predictable and probably not that exciting for me to invite you to ring in and tell me how angry you are about nurses being offered 1%. So here's how we're going to do it, you and me. Just tell me what sort of year you've had if you work in the NHS. That's all, okay? And then at the end of our conversations, everybody can go away with an idea of how we should rightly respond to suggestions this morning from the Health Minister. Satire is dead. From the Health Minister, Nadine Dorries, that this is perfectly acceptable conduct on behalf of the Conservative government. Tell us all about the year you've had as a doctor or a nurse. I don't know what the confidentiality clauses that you're bound by contain, but you don't have to use your real name. What sort of year have you had? And yes, you can use this platform to tell the people whose health you work daily to protect and safeguard, the people who you look after, how you feel about being offered 1%. Maybe I've got this all wrong, and actually you don't need a pay rise at all. You just want us all to go back to giving you a round of applause on Thursday afternoons, when in the case of most politicians there just happens to be a photographer handy. Was it Farage who was banging a pan with a wooden spoon while someone else filmed it? Probably. So what sort of year have you had? And honestly and undilutedly, how do you feel about being offered 1% by this government after what you've just done? 0345 6060 973. Tell me about your year, and then just tell me how you feel, because you never know. You never know. They might be listening. We are inviting you to tell us what sort of year you've had if you work in the NHS, and how you feel about this 1% offer, which of course with inflation won't be probably 1%, and if inflation goes over 1% will not even really be a pay rise in what we call real terms, okay? And unbelievable, really, to reflect upon the question of how after this year you could possibly be facing a 1% pay rise from the government that, as many of you are pointing out to me, Boris Johnson calls it the NHS test and trace, but when it's the vaccines that he's talking about, it's somehow a government achievement. The vaccine rollout, is this, asked Simon, subliminal messaging? And I told you people would be cross with me for missing stuff off my list. Anthony writes, you forgot we put a protective ring around care homes. Truly shameful. Corruption and incompetence. Well, corruption is a legal matter that would have to be proved. To allege it without proof is libel. So you can say that Matt Hancock has acted unlawfully by not disclosing details of contracts. And actually, can we chase this up? Because Boris Johnson, I think, misled the House. So remember when I defended the Department of Health on the grounds that they did publish the contracts, but it was just a little bit late. Because I still, and I know what you're thinking, when are you going to learn? I still think they're not going to be that barefaced in their dishonesty. But I think they were on that occasion, so we probably need to withdraw that defence. We'll certainly be talking to Jolly and Morm from the Good Law Project in the final hour of the programme about some of these established and continuing issues. So, 1%. Pay review. Department of Health said the Treasury had already assumed a 1% maximum and that anything more would have to be paid for by cuts to services, which might, you might be able to crunch the numbers. But when you learn that there's £37 billion set to be spent on that test and trace system, which has achieved close to nothing, you could be forgiven for wondering whether you've woken up on a different planet. Katerina is in Potter's Bar. Katerina, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. So I'm mostly a private nurse now, but I used to work in the NHS. I've just applied for a job as a vaccinator in the NHS, so technically I do work for the NHS now. But day to day, mostly what I do is train doctors and nurses who are desperate to leave the NHS and looking for a way out.
Well, that's a worry.
It really is. I hear nurses telling me that people have died in pain because there wasn't anyone. I know that I don't want to frighten people who might be due to go into hospital and stuff like that. It's sad.
I know.
Yeah.
Just be aware of that. That's all.
Okay.
But still, I don't want you to censor yourself. I just want us both to be a little bit more sensitive than comes to me naturally. I know it comes to you very naturally.
Yeah, well, okay, so people are not able to do the job that they want to do, that they feel sick not being able to do because of staffing levels, because of how tired they are, because of the fact that it's agency nurses that are covering nurses off sick. And it doesn't seem to me to be getting better. They feel so undervalued, not having the right PPE.
Well, none of this would be fixed by a pay rise. None of the things you've mentioned would be fixed by a pay rise, would they?
I think it would go some way to showing them that they're appreciated for the work that they do and how awful it's been over the pandemic. And, the years where they haven't received anything, in effect, is a pay cut. So, yes, I think it would go some way to retaining staff.
Do you think 1%
is a hard enough job?
Do you think 1% is worse than nothing?
No.
I know that technically it's not. In some bands it'll be £3.50 a week, which is £3.50 more than nothing. But sometimes, you get. I don't know quite where this is coming from.
In the face a little bit.
It feels more insulting. So if they said, look, we simply can't afford any pay rises for anyone in the public sector, because this is almost as if, on the one hand, they're acknowledging that there is a need to recognise what staff have been through this year. And on the other hand, it's like, OK, we'll acknowledge it. Here's 1%, which is like, you've got no idea what we've been through this year.
Yeah. And go through anyway. This year has been particularly awful and last, obviously. But it's a hard job, and you do it because you love it and you love the patient.
Do they? I mean, why did you move out of the NHS into the private sector? Just out of interest? Was it for the reasons that you've just described other people as having now?
And it was because you've got a really poor way of life if you earn that money only. I can't afford. I would never been able to afford the mortgage that I can afford now.
So yeah, fair enough.
And I felt like my family deserved that.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
And you deserve more. So you don't. I mean, this is arguably going to make a bad situation worse. It's certainly not going to make anybody feel more valued or more loved or better rewarded.
But we have to say it, don't we?
Well, this is the problem I've often wondered about because, I'm a radio presenter on commercial radio. I don't think anyone could argue that I have chosen my career path out of some sense of vocation or a desire to help people. I love my work in the way that many doctors and nurses love their work, but as Katerina says, there comes a point where you have to look after your own, and I think they sort of capitalise on the reward, the sense of reward that many healthcare professionals get, not being material. So, you know, my favourite days at work have nothing to do with how much I get paid and everything to do with what happens on the radio, but I get paid a hell of a lot more than your average doctor or nurse, so it's like the best of both worlds. For a nurse in particular, because so much of the reward is emotional, since 2010, it's as if they've decided to strip the material back as far as they can humanly get away with. I don't know, I could be wrong. That's just how I see it from the outside. Alex is in Bristol. Alex, what can you tell us?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I think this pay rise that the government have offered NHS workers is absolutely appalling. I mean, £3.50 a week pretty much equates to an extra cup of coffee a week.
Won't get you a pint of beer, will it?
Absolutely
at the
not.
End of a shift.
And you know, we've got to think about the human cost that NHS workers have actually come across this year. You know, we have worked ourselves sick. Me, myself included. You know,
Yes.
I have worked, you know, through my weeks of annual leave because there's nothing else to do. I've held, you know, the phone to dying relatives, to dying patients, to relatives' ears, so that they can talk to their patients, to their relatives, because they can't come and visit. You know, I've held dying people's hands. This is the human cost of the pandemic, and you know, we've had 850 NHS staff die because of this pandemic, and you know, what does the government offer us? It's peanuts.
I mean, it's more my field than yours, I suppose, to try to analyse political motivations. You're too busy looking after people.
Well, I mean, if you talk about political motivations, you've only got to look at the Towns Fund. You know, Robert Jenrick's given £25 million to his own constituent to fix up his own castle. But you know, so there is money out there to
there's a calculation that the massive majority of areas likely to benefit from this so-called Towns Fund are Conservative areas, including Rishi Sunak.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, we'll look into that. But what you're suggesting, I think, intentionally or not, is that because nurses are not likely to vote Conservative, then frankly they can just whistle for it. Is that behind your suggestion?
Well, I mean, you know, I think we really need to look at, you know, if you look at nurses' pay, you know, compared to a decade ago,
yes.
You know, we're about £6,144 worse off.
About.
But, you know,
because you didn't include the pence. That's why it's an approximation. £6,144 approximately.
Yeah, and you've got to think, you know, we've been hit year after year since 2010 with pay freezes, with austerity, you know, and you know, an RCN survey 6 months ago showed that, you know, about a third nurses surveyed are thinking of leaving.
I know, and one of the reasons when I used to dig into people insisting furiously that they were not remotely racist and their vote for Brexit was actually because they liked foreign people and wanted to help them stay in their own country so they could work there as nurses and doctors instead of coming here. And it was, you know, possibly true, but it's emerged this week that 100 countries have been added to the list from which we will recruit, including some who arguably really can't afford to lose their qualified medical personnel. So even if you did think that was what you voted for in 2016, you've managed to achieve the exact opposite. But hey-ho, everybody knew what they were doing. 10:30 is the time. What sort of year have you had? And how does this feel? How does this 1% maximum pay rise in the loosest of terms for doctors and nurses feel? And I think historically at this point, I usually pull out that Noam Chomsky quote about privatisation, don't I? Because if you are looking for a political motivation, how can they treat the NHS with such utter contempt? Then one answer that moves into the space available is that they want to cripple it. They want to undermine it. They want to reduce its popularity and efficacy so they can flog it off to their mates. Oh, anyway, it's not as if this lot have got a record for handing extremely lucrative contracts to their mates, is it? I can't imagine. Listen, if I've got a soft spot, it's for public services, public sector. It's for people who have chosen their careers. And look, you could just about cast journalism in this way, but I'm not going to try. It would be unbearable. They choose their careers out of a desire to help the population. And of course, in the context of emergency services or frontline public services. It's a career decision. I know people also look at what the pensions are like and how much you get paid and what have you, but we seem to have created a society in which, pathological liars who end up with loads of money in the bank are treated like royalty, while nurses with naff all in the bank are treated like doormats. Except occasionally when we do things like bang saucepans on our doorsteps and cheer them to the rafters, and then look the other way when they get offered a pittance of a pay rise at the end of a year like the one they've had. So I have a conscious of an Achilles heel, perhaps, of being too sentimental. Started with the firefighters. All right, that was a real Damascene moment for me politically, because I was still had one foot on Fleet Street when the firefighters in London were threatening industrial action and indeed later taking industrial action. And I had never noticed, when I was a tabloid journalist, I had never noticed how we routinely talked and wrote about the public sector. I honestly hadn't noticed. I was on showbiz and gossip. I mean, I've got some excuses. But I'd never noticed how quickly people that I considered colleagues and friends would do the bidding of right-wing politicians and turn on emergency services. I mean, I can't believe how baffled and surprised I was by it now, looking at how normal it is. How many times have I said to you, start the clock, Keith, they'll be turning on the teachers next, and then halfway through lockdown, all the teachers started getting a kicking again. Start the clock, Keith, they'll be turning on the nurses next, and here we are today looking at an absolute insult of a pay rise being suggested within, metaphorical hours of us last clapping on our doorsteps. Quite incredible, really. But that was the moment for me. So I know I have a sentimental streak. I don't think today it has kicked in. Because after the year you've had, they needed to do more than this. And I can't, for the life of me, it was interesting listening to Nick as well, who obviously we have slightly different attitudes, you could argue, to labour issues and indeed to public sector workers like teachers and nurses and firefighters and what have you over the years. But he's as confused as I am as to how this one got out of the bag. Even if you want to see Boris Johnson as an incredibly cynical, self-serving sociopath, and I don't think he is, for the record, but if you wanted to see him like that, you still wouldn't have done this because it makes you look so bad. So what's the plan? Or are we back in that place where we're expecting some sort of clarity in leadership and we can't quite process the fact that there isn't any? So all I want from you today is a quick account of what your year has been like, and a quick, and I know you're not comfortable complaining, and I know you didn't go into nursing to get rich, but I want to know how you feel at the end of this particular year to be offered a 1% pay rise while the Consumer Prices Index measure of inflation currently stands at 0.7%. The OBR are forecasting that it will be at 1.5% by the end of the year and 1.8% next year, which means that what they're actually offering you is a pay cut. The money you've got will go less far next year than it would go this year, even with the 1% pay rise in place. 10:39 is the time. Penny is in Leeds. Penny, what made you pick up the phone?
I've just retired.
Okay. What, just this morning?
On Sunday I will be formally retired.
Are you joking? I was being facetious. That'll teach me, Penny. Well, congratulations.
No, that's absolutely right. I wouldn't have rung in if I'd still been working because I would have felt very anxious about how that would have been seen. I'm
getting a lot of that on my texts and emails.
Yes, I have many times wanted to speak to the press.
Yes.
Basically, I have worked as an occupational therapist in the NHS and for 5 years in social care since 1982 when I qualified. I have felt I work in child mental health virtually all my life. One of the things I wanted to say really is that, yes, it is a slap in the face for nursing staff and anybody working in health, but equally for social care staff, that they don't seem to have got anything. My main concern over the last year, what it's actually been like, is that we have had many young people that we have not been able to see because of redeployment. But this has not been really any different prior to COVID.
No.
The waiting list has been up to a year for young people to get treatment. And
even longer in some areas, even in one South London healthcare trust, it was over a year, even if you had... I'm always a little uncomfortable and unfamiliar with what I'm supposed and allowed to say on the radio with regard to this. But even if you'd made an attempt on your own life, sometimes you would.
Yes, if you self-harmed, yes. I mean, in the area that I work, that I was working in, our systems were pretty good in terms of risk.
Yes.
And also, one of the good things that the government did was that they actually made money available for new teams for eating disorders to be set up.
Yes.
And Leeds was one of the areas that received the money. So that was absolutely fantastic. But for the run-of-the-mill young person that was emotionally struggling with depression and anxiety, if it was appropriate for them to have cognitive behavioural therapy, and I was trained to do that, they would likely be waiting a year.
And everything gets worse. It's not like you press pause on the kind of problems that you help children and young people deal with. They deteriorate and they escalate throughout that year. Often
they would be not attending school because they couldn't manage it. And the other thing that would regularly happen is that because they had become more desperate and their parents had become more desperate and worried, they would either make an attempt on their life or they would be saying that that's what they were going to do, and that's how they would get seen. The other big area which is really concerning, and this is in my area where I was working, it's historical. Young people who possibly had autism and ADHD, they would be waiting up to 18 months, 2 years for their first assessment. But it now makes up 70% of the referrals into our service. So that all has a knock-on effect as well. I won't say the other thing.
I mean, it breaks my heart that you feel liberated by your looming retirement to simply tell your truths, to be seen, because they bank on two things, don't they? They bank on that discretion and that fear of facing sanction if you did blow whistles. And they bank on the fact that very few people in the NHS, and I, as I said earlier, I'm conscious of my sentimental streak, so I won't claim it's everybody, but very few people in the NHS are motivated by money. It's not a job that you go into if getting rich is your top priority.
Yeah, and what I would say in response to that is what I have noticed is that, and I would include myself in this, that the hours that you end up working are far more. I had, in the last 2 years, I had reduced my hours for the first time to full-time to part-time, and I was working an extra couple of hours every single day. Now, I would say this has come in the last 4 to 5 years, really, and you are very micromanaged. If something happens, you are hauled over the coals when sometimes you cannot do the work. And I really feel for people who are coming into, I know I'm long in the tooth, you see.
Well, you say that. I prefer experienced, Penny. But what do you think the plan is? Because I spent most of the COVID catastrophe wondering whether we were watching epic incompetence or whether we were watching some sort of sinister master plan. And I lean towards the former now. They just didn't know what to do, and therefore they didn't do anything. What do you think the plan is when you describe such an obvious diminishment of our National Health Service? And I'd remind my listeners, because you probably know this, that in 2010, the patient satisfaction survey was at the highest it had ever been before Cameron and Osborne and Clegg got in.
Well, where I was working, we were outsourcing quite a lot of work. So there was an amazing amount of money found.
So you would say that they prioritised putting money into money and services into the private sector over the quality of the service that you provided?
No, I wouldn't say that. But when we can't get our work done, if some families, thankfully, would complain. I would exhort parents to complain, actually, and to go to their MPs.
This is sharp elbows again, isn't it?
You can't do it as a clinician.
No, you don't. Your punches don't land or your points don't get heard, and it's something that is, I mean, it's a big worry, is that the more au fait, the more confident, the sharper your elbows are, the more likely you are to be able to get the service that everyone deserves. But of course, the children who are most desperate and most vulnerable are often the children whose parents are perhaps least suited to banging on doors and making these points. That's my opinion. I'm not putting any more words in Penny's mouth after she spat out the last ones. Penny, congratulations. Are you having a party? Have you got anything planned for Sunday?
No, we couldn't.
Oh, you're having a party. You say, hello, James. You've noticed this pandemic, have you, mate? Yeah, I've got everyone coming round. We've got 400 people in the front room. When this is over, have a cake on me, Penny. Take care and happy retirement. 10:46 is the time. 1%. Do you want to have a crack at the politics of it? Shall I dig out that old Chomsky quote? What's the plan here? How could it? You would be able, I imagine, to find even the most quivering of Boris Johnson cheerleaders today will either be completely ignoring the story or staring at it in abject befuddlement. After the year that we've had, to do this to them makes no sense. To me, at least. Does it make sense to you? Is there a plan here that I lack the wit to see? Do I need, to employ one of my favourite analogies, do I need your help in stepping back from that canvas so that I can actually see the full picture? I may summon the Usherwood in a moment because Keir Starmer has been speaking. If he doesn't make this stick, if he doesn't make this land, then I despair, actually, because I care about this country. And the idea that you can have a Home Secretary forced to pay £340,000 to a civil servant who accused her of being a bully, an accusation that was found to be true by the Prime Minister's independent advisor on the Ministerial Code, but when the Prime Minister chose to ignore that inquiry, he felt compelled to resign. That was Sir Alexander Allen. Sir Philip Rutland felt compelled to resign, or at least accused the Department of constructive dismissal after quitting as the Home Office's top civil servant and making a TV statement detailing his allegations. The government decided to fight it, and they rolled over yesterday and gave him £340,000 of your money. Yeah? Doff cap, tug forelock. I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. Still working, is it? All right, let's have a look at the £37 billion that's been spent on the test and trace system that has also, it was reported yesterday, barely touched the sides of what it was supposed to do. And remember, with a good test and trace system in place, we could have had a lot less lockdown. That's not an opinion. That's just counting. Look at the countries that have performed brilliantly without lockdowns, and I think they will, every single one of them, have superb test and trace in place. We've spent £37 billion on ours, or we will have done within 2 years, according to the budget that was released yesterday. And as Theo Usherwood reported, the cuts to the budget for the Department of Health and Social Care will run to about £30 billion. Is it landing yet? You feeling it yet? Or do you still think there's a toaster in the box that Boris sold you back in 2016, rather than just a box with a picture of a toaster on the outside? And then we turn to the 1%. And this looks big to me. I'm a bit of a student of Twitter, as you know. I apologise to people who've managed to avoid its siren lure, but you can trend, which is like the kind of things most being talked about on Twitter, with barely any action at all these days. I speak from profound personal experience. You can start trending with about 2,000 tweets. There are currently 2.34 million tweets featuring the phrase "the 1%." So this is landing. And why is it landing? Because when we stood on our doorsteps to clap the NHS for most of last year, do you know what? Most of us weren't actually giggling into our handkerchiefs and only pretending to care. Most of us actually do care. And given the context of the coronavirus, the right-wing media couldn't put any effort whatsoever into turning you against these people, like it did, for example, during the junior doctors' industrial action. They couldn't do it. That's what happens when you are not being shown the world through the lens of what billionaire media owners want you to see. And it appears that the government that encouraged us to clap were sniggering into their handkerchiefs and didn't give a fig about the men and women toiling daily to help keep the rest of us safe and indeed alive. So, I don't know. Those three things to me seem huge. £37 billion. £37 billion on test and trace. The £340,000 for the civil servant who accused Priti Patel of being a bully. You don't pay £340,000 to someone who's accused you of doing something wrong if you haven't done anything wrong. All right? That's just me stating the bleeding obvious. And then the 1% for nurses. Emily writes, I've been a nurse for 36 years and that's it for me, James. I'm at the top of my pay band, so I don't get an annual increase. I've worked throughout the pandemic. I had COVID myself and I lost my mum last year, but because of COVID was unable to see her. This is an absolute insult. Some of my colleagues are having to sell their annual leave back to the hospital as they haven't been able to take any. How can this be acceptable? Answer, well, you've heard it in the news bulletin already that one union is threatening industrial action. As soon as they take industrial action, Emily knows better than I do, public opinion will shift. They move the right-wing newspaper tabloid tanks onto your lawns, and suddenly the people who today you feel mightily and sincerely aggrieved for become your enemy. And if you don't believe me, have a look at what they did to teachers. Have a look at what they do to firefighters. Have a look at what they do to police officers who aren't even allowed to take industrial action but end up getting blamed for everything that has been inflicted upon them by austerity, ideology or right-wing politicians. Crikey, I'm bored of this refrain, but it doesn't make it wrong. In many ways, you get bored of it because it's true and it makes no difference. And people who hate to be shown their own reflections in mirrors because they think they're actually in favour of this kind of thing, except when they're on their doorstep hitting a pan with a wooden spoon, they hate it as well because, of course, nobody ugly likes to see what they look like in the mirror. And Keith should know. That's not fair. I should have done an I should know there. And I should know. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. What sort of year have you had in the NHS? And would you be ready for this yet? Trying to get people involved who aren't NHS professionals, healthcare professionals, and a lot of you a little cross at the suggestion that social care workers are mostly private sector, regardless of who may have made that claim. It's a very small section of social care. There are social workers working in the community with very vulnerable people, not all older people, who are going into people's homes not knowing who has COVID until it's too late. Social care workers in the community have worked non-stop, keeping very vulnerable and ill people safe out of hospital. They've helped with hospital discharge. They're continuing to provide support and assessment care in the community whilst doing so with no recognition and without the benefit of knowing that they are what they are walking into. It's not all private sector older person residential homes. That's from Jackie, who is understandably unhappy at the depiction of social care workers being confined to private sector care homes. Why? Because it's not true. But does it matter? If, for example, nurses announced industrial action, which is a terrifying prospect for any country, I mean, literally terrifying, would you cease to support them? Because how many times have I said to you, what else can they do? You know, they are being insulted by the government today. You are being insulted by the government today, but you have nothing in response except collective bargaining and industrial action. But the minute you mention collective bargaining or industrial action, they'll accuse you of being Joseph Stalin. And everyone else will join in. And the way they get everyone else to join in is by saying, well, you don't get that kind of protection at work, do you? You're not allowed to go. No, you can't go. You don't have union representation. Your pension's been It's incredible. And I hate to say this, because I ask you so often for your explanation of what's going on. I'm beginning to think it is just sadism. It is a political project that's built on hurting other people, hurting the right people. You remember then that Donald Trump fan said during lockdown? She said he's not hurting the right people with this lockdown. What else could it be? Refer back to our caller from a couple of years ago, possibly too often, when he said, I know Donald Trump's a liar, but I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. And I think of that often because I wonder at what point do you realise that people like me and Sadiq Khan are upset because people like you are going to get hurt? And at that point, do you still like it, even though you're the one getting hurt? I'm getting upset about you getting hurt, and you love it because I'm upset. Ooh, drink those Remainer tears. Unbelievable. Priti Patel, £340,000 for a man who accused her of bullying. They still deny she's a bully. The independent inquiry into whether or not she's a bully found that she was a bully, and the bloke that wrote it had to resign because Boris Johnson chose to completely ignore him. Dido Harding, remember when her name was dropping off every government minister's lips on a minute by minute basis? Dido Harding's going to be, she's going to be great. Oh, good old Dido. Baroness Harding, I should say. £37 billion on a test and trace system that is just pants. Technical term, that. Absolute bobbins. And by the way, if you're concerned about cronyism and or corruption in this Conservative government, then don't worry, there is an MP to whom you can take your complaint, and he is married to Dido Harding. Nah, I love it. It upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. Northern Ireland, peace process now, under mortal threat, I would say. I hope I'm wrong, as always. But it was so obviously going to happen. David Frost now breaking the agreement, literally breaking the agreement, probably breaking international law, because we signed a withdrawal agreement that committed us to certain dates and measures being put in place. We haven't put them in place, so we're trying to move the dates. The idea of a British government breaking international law, well, don't be ridiculous. Well, hang on, what did Brandon Lewis stand up and say last year? We're going to do it in a very limited and specific way. They've told you. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. It's not as if Boris Johnson sent people to actually mislead the Queen, except, of course, he did. And Jacob Rees-Mogg was one of them. But I love it. I love it when they mislead the Queen, because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. I love it when Priti Patel has to pay £340,000 of my money because she was found to be a bully. That's a slightly convoluted description of what's happened. Oh, I love that. £340,000 of my money to annoy you lefties. Yeah, nice one, Priti. Hey, I love her because she often appears on television with 73 flags behind her. Oh, and also, with the Shamima Begum story, of course, her and Sajid Javid subscribe to the school of thought that says they are less British than me. You wonder why that goes down well with certain Conservative voters, because you can't take my citizenship away. I'm not a dual national, but they are, potentially. They have parents who were born overseas, and they're in favour of those people being second-class citizens in this country by dint of having parents who were born overseas. And £37 billion on test and trade. How much are they spending on their lunch? Do you see those stories? So the Mail's in a bit of a pickle at the moment because it can't turn on a Conservative government. That would be like, it's not quite a turkey voting for Christmas, is it? But it's so they're focusing quite a lot of attention on the Prime Minister's current partner and the mother of his latest child. And the story today is about how much they're spending, or not spending, how much free lunch they're getting sent by a Conservative Party donor who runs JCB, which was, of course, a big cheerleader for Brexit. Getting paid, they're getting sent more free food in a week than they're offering nurses a pay rise in a year. I'm going to have to stick a probably on the end of that sentence because I haven't actually done any sums yet. But it's not going to be. If it's £3.50 a week, all right, it's probably 150. All right, yeah, I think they are probably getting a hamper. I've been to Dalesford, which is the food shop owned by Bamford's wife, and it is so expensive. I know a lad who used to be a butcher there. It is unbelievably expensive in there. And it sort of sucks you in. But they're getting sent free food from there while offering nurses 1%. And they might set up a charity so she can redecorate the flat, because the Mail reports today Boris Johnson's getting a bit worried about it costing up to £200,000. On £3.50 a week for nurses, how long would it take to decorate a £200,000 job in your home? How many nurses live in homes that are worth less than £200,000, which is what Boris Johnson reportedly thinks Carrie Simmons is going to spend on redecorating their gaff? How much is your house worth, Nursey? Yeah. You see? Yeah, you're still loving it because it upsets me, upsets people, upsets lefties, yeah? And that, of course, is why we're having a culture war. Because all of these facts make you feel ridiculous. And the only way you can stop feeling ridiculous is by getting cross about someone who said something mean about slavery. Or someone who's insisting that we actually have more history in our schools and our stately homes. And if you can be persuaded that they're a real threat to you, there's a footballer over there on one knee. Oh, my God! There's a politician on the telly who's not got a flag draped around her shoulders. Oh, my God, what a traitor. Stone her. Stone him. So all the stuff that really matters is over there. 340 grand of your money to a civil servant who accused Priti Patel of being a bully. £37 billion of your money on a test and trace system that doesn't work. 1% pay rise for the nurses who have, who have gone above and beyond the call of any duty in the course of this year. Highest death rate in the world for any country with a population of over 20 million. Worst recession in the G7, one of the worst economic performances on the planet. Absolutely appalling death toll. Opening primary schools for a day. Unlawful conduct at the Ministry of Health. All of that's over there. Why aren't you getting cross about that? Well, the vaccines have gone quite well, and I think these are the guys who are going to protect us from people that don't like slavery. Okay. These are the guys that are going to protect our statues. Yeah, real people are dying at a rate that we're not seeing anywhere else in the... Don't care. These are the guys to protect our statues. Look, he's got 4 flags in the background in his latest television appearance. How can you tell me he doesn't have my interests at heart? Because he's letting your family die. Yeah, but count the flags, James. Do you get it yet? It's coming up to 11:15. Like I said, it's great for business. So much to talk about. But it's not really very good for anyone, is it? What do you care more about? Your grandma's health? Or that statue of a fella you'd never heard of? Until it popped up on social media. Well, maybe it is the statue you care about, in which case I can only feel sorry for your grandma. It's a sort of curious mixture of scorn and surrealism today, because every time I list all of these things that we've endured over the course of the last year, you'd imagine that some sort of great torrent of rage would be building among the population, but it isn't. We've all witnessed what's happened in the last year, from the debacle with our exams to the death toll and the death rate and the economic disaster and everything from Priti Patel's bullying payout right through to Matt Hancock's unlawful conduct, the misleading of the Queen, if you go back even further, and of course the lies about Barnard Castle. And they're storming ahead in the polls. Why? Why, actually? It's a good phone-in. Should have done that at 10 o'clock. But we didn't, because today I'm more interested in how you're getting on in the NHS. Sarah's in Southampton. Sarah, you've probably nodded off. I do apologise. I didn't know that tirade was on the way in. I thought I'd got it all off my chest already, but it turns out there's a lot there. What made you pick up the phone this morning?
Well, clearly you needed to get it off your chest, James. I totally understand.
Yeah. Well, you're a nurse. You should know.
I'm an operating department practitioner, so
Okay.
not quite a nurse, a different kind of person in the NHS.
Yes.
I was just basically calling because I started in the NHS just before the pandemic kicked off, my first ever job. So I qualified straight into sort of the baptism of fire, so to speak, and dealt with COVID firsthand in the people that I was helping to look after. And it's been an incredibly difficult time. And obviously I don't have a reference point pre-COVID for what the NHS was like to work in. So this is all my experience. But the general consensus from talking to my colleagues is that this 1%, it's disappointing, but it's not surprising.
No.
And there was lots of talk about how they were going to stab us in the back, and they've stabbed us in the back. It's the ultimate betrayal, isn't it?
Forgive me for interrupting, Sarah, but they've stabbed you in the front. You're the one that you should be the anatomist in this exchange, not me.
It's very true. It's very true. It's such a difficult. It's such a difficult thing to talk about when you started talking about strike action, because
I know.
Nobody wants to not go to work and withhold our care from the people that we are trusted to look after. But when a government is treating you like dirt, basically, and telling you you're not worth more than 1%, and that your time and your skills and your effort in the wake of the past, 15 months isn't worth more than 1%, I don't see how you can do anything else.
And yet, it pains me to tell you, as someone who's relatively new in the health service, that if you do take industrial action, it will take approximately 4 minutes for the public to be successfully turned against you.
Exactly. So I don't know what to do. What do we do, James? What's the answer? Because I can tell you that 1% is it's a pittance. It doesn't. Was it £3.50 a week? It's a cup of coffee.
In terms of take-home pay, that's what Dame Donna Kinnair from the Royal College of Nursing has estimated.
But for me, as a newly qualified person, I've got £60,000 worth of debt that will follow me for the rest of my working life. So that 1% will just go to pay off some of that debt. So
I don't know if it will. Again, I'm splitting hairs, but I don't think you become eligible to pay off that debt with a 1% pay rise. I don't think it pushes you into threshold territory. No, I understand.
Any extra that I earn over that threshold. So if you give me any more money, that money gets taken away from me to pay back what I've paid to train.
It's not. I've suddenly remembered some good news.
What?
I can't believe they didn't do this. Why am I the one that has to point this out? They can give the nurses the $350 million a week that they've saved by leaving the European Union.
Well, I was going to ask you where that went, to be honest with you. But
you mean you haven't got it?
No, I haven't got it, but I think Dido Harding did.
Well,
I think Dido did. But they're not being James, the one thing I feel really passionate about is they're just not thinking outside the box. It's always about if you can't make the figures work because there isn't anything in the public purse for this 1%, then you need to start looking at other ways to put money back in healthcare workers' pockets. You need to start looking at sort of benefits in kind almost, if they're in some sort of way in helping to retain the staff.
Well, you mean like maybe giving them free food?
Free food, or
because I know a bloke who's getting sent loads of free food by the fella by the woman whose husband runs JCB.
Yeah, but yes, that would help as well. I mean, it's really difficult to get food after sort of 5 o'clock in a hospital, and as you know,
I'll put you down for a litre of truffle oil.
Yes, that would be wonderful. But in terms of students, you could suspend their payments, so that when they start working in the NHS, they're not losing part of whatever extra they earn to their student loan repayments. That would help retention. It would help recruitment. But we're spending thousands of pounds of recruiting nurses from abroad, and we've got plenty of people here that want to do it.
I know.
But
why is that, actually? Why is that? Because one of the dodgy think tanks made great play out of this. Why is it that the net is being cast overseas and that applications from within the UK are not all being fast-tracked? Do you know?
I've no idea.
It's a weird one.
You'd have to talk to people at a trust level to find out why that is. But it's simply that I don't think that there are enough qualified people able to work.
So you can hire a qualified nurse from overseas, and that's going to be a heck of a lot cheaper, even with debts and loans, than it would be to train somebody unqualified up from scratch to qualification.
Pretty much. But then there's the other aspect of this is the divide in the cost of living between different halves of the country and different parts of the country. So if you're in the South Coast, like I am in Southampton, it's more expensive to live here than it is, say, in Leeds, for example. Yes. I could buy a house outright for what I have pay in rent down here. Do you know what I mean? So they're not thinking about.
And that's why the language of levelling up can sound so seductive. But of course, it is. And you're talking almost about levelling down in a sense. But you want to see flesh on bones. You want to believe that there is actions behind the words. And as you say, it's a phrase I normally would yellow card you for. But outside the box thinking makes perfect sense in this context. You'd just like to see some intelligent government, is what you're saying.
I just want them to stop talking in terms of we can't, and start talking in terms of we can do this for you. And
the fact that they're going to protect you, all those statues of people you've never heard of, that must surely count for something.
Maybe they could just take the statues, melt them down, and I don't know, give us some money. I don't know.
Fake coins and hand them out like Maundy money. Thank you for all that you do, Sarah. I'm sorry that's an astonishing position to be in. Imagine having your only experience of working in the NHS being 2020. I hope it isn't glib to suggest that things can only get better in many ways, albeit that things probably can only get worse in terms of wages and pay. So why can't we spend that 350 million? Remember when everyone voted for Brexit because Dominic Cummings put it on the side of a bus that we could spend 350 million pounds a week, that we'd somehow be better off, even though at the same time, Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying, well, the economic benefits may take 100 years. And Dominic Cummings had it on the side of a bus saying 350 million quid a week, all in. Yay. How does that work then? I love it because it upsets people like you. What? I'm all right, Jack. Matt's in Tunbridge Wells. Matt, what's going on?
Hiya, how you doing?
Well, honestly, or just in the context of polite exchanges on the radio that pass for small talk?
Definitely polite exchanges.
Yeah, great, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. First time I've called.
Carry on.
I'm bit directly opposite to your last call. I've been in the NHS 26 years now.
Right.
Gosh. I'm in facilities.
Okay.
I'm currently managing 150 staff, mostly porters, domestic staff.
Right.
And they're devastated today. Absolutely devastated.
Big year,
but
mate.
they know.
Big year, and then a huge kick in the teeth yesterday.
Exactly, but they know the minute they walked out the door for strike action, which they wouldn't do anyway.
No.
The duty of care for everyone they look after is absolutely exemplary.
Of course.
It's amazing, but they know that the media would turn on them like a sixpence. Everything would be twisted, as we know. And it's just so frustrating. Frustrating.
I always find it weird, obviously, but I'm on the outside looking in, and it seems quite straightforward to me that the way you do it is a kind of divide and rule. So I remember when I used to do paper reviews and turn up on other people's programmes to shoot my mouth off, people would often say, why should they get a good pension? Because we don't. And that always struck me as being like, well, I got mugged yesterday and I'm not going to be happy unless you get mugged tomorrow. Do you see what I mean? That's the bit that you could argue the left over the last 30 years has completely quit the field on trying to make people understand the power of unity and collective argument. So how do you explain the speed with which the public, who were cheering you every Thursday night last year, would be booing you if you dared to take industrial action, despite the fact that they mostly agree with you that this is a hugely insulting offer?
I think people are just too easily led, too easily hypnotised into believing the spin and the spiel that comes out of Number 10, and
maybe,
all the papers are in the pockets.
No, not all of them, and also I can't. It's a bit pot kettle for me, Matt. But people aren't stupid generally. You'd think it's something to do with empathy. It's something to do getting that divide between public and private. And you heard Boris trying it today. If you can make people think that if I could make people think that you were getting something they weren't getting, they don't stop to wonder whether they deserve it or not, or whether you deserve it or not. You can just flick that switch. Oh, look, Matt over there, he's getting something you're not getting. And that's how you turn the public against the people that drag them out of burning buildings or wheel them to the operating theatre for a life-saving operation.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
I think that's all it is.
Yeah, I mean, the guys I manage, they're band twos in the NHS, which is lowest paid. So these guys are on $8.92 an hour. They start $8.92 an hour. It's 18 grand a year, and they've been on the front line.
What sort of year have they had, Matt?
Very, very challenging. Very, very challenging. I mean, we've had it's very difficult managing, particularly through the beginning with the PPE, because we would have to do fit mask tests for they call it an AGP, so aerosol generated procedures. When we're going into the rooms, you need a fit mask test to make sure you've got a mask that actually fits you. With 150 staff, we were fit mask testing each member of staff ourselves, which was taking 20 odd minutes per staff. 150 staff, doesn't take long to do the maths. We've got a management team of about 6 or 7 people that were doing that. So you can imagine when they suddenly run out of a mask, after we've spent that amount of time and resource fit testing all these people, if that mask suddenly becomes unavailable and they give us another one, we start from scratch.
You've got to go all over
it's so demoralising.
Of course it is, and at the same time we're reading about some of these contracts for providing PPE being given to the Turkish cousin of Del Boy Trotter. Matt, look after yourself, mate. I get a bit excited sometimes, but people like you drag me back down to earth. I mean, it's righteous excitement, it's indignation, but just the quotidian, the daily grind of doing what your colleagues do for 18 grand a year, while the Mail reports Johnson's received not far shy of that figure in free lunches in the last 12 months.